Hey everyone, this is Charles Mitri from loungeboudoir.com, and in this episode of Boudoir Pose Breakdown, we're going to take a look at a pose that I call Cleopatra. Now let me just minimize my screen here. This is the pose that I call Cleopatra, and the reason I call it that is because it reminds me of how I envision Cleopatra would look when she was riding around in her human-powered carriage through the streets of Egypt. It's a very regal, kind of majestic pose, elegant and sexy all at the same time. It's also easier to give your client a scenario where you tell them, okay, once they get into the pose here, have them envision themselves, say, hey look, pretend like you're Cleopatra, you're being carried around the city in your human-powered chariot, cart, or carriage, whatever, and everyone that sees you is gasping at how beautiful you are. It gives the client something that they can focus on when they get into the pose, as opposed to, all right, lay on your side, put your head in profile, look up that way, and click. I mean, it's just empty. There's nothing fueling the pose. So giving them something to imagine, I think, really helps buoy the pose up. So don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you like these videos. Thank you, I appreciate it very much. So what is the pose saying? To me, this is a pose about understated power along with elegance and sexiness. There's an air of superiority to it, I think. Now I shoot this pose with the face in profile. I like her not looking into camera, and I really like the line that it creates from the top of her head, down her face, down her shoulder, down her arm, down her leg, all the way down to her feet. I like that line. And I suppose you could shoot this with her looking into camera. It would have a different feel to it. But in order to get that kind of air of superiority to it, I'd have her kind of almost looking down her nose at you into camera. That might have the same attitude that the face in profile does. You can experiment both ways. I usually shoot this in profile. Now going back to the original here, it's an easy pose to get into. Just have her lay on her side, top leg sort of overlaps the bottom leg, and her upper body is supported by her arm here. Her top arm is just sort of tracing that waist-hip curve with her hand just gently resting on her thigh, and then her head turns to so her face is in profile. Now there's a variation to this, which is have her drop down onto her elbow here. What this does is it changes the angle of her upper body, and it elongates the form here a bit. Now her face isn't in strict profile. You can kind of play around with that. It's kind of how the head naturally falls when she's into this position. I think when she's up on her arm here, it's easier to have her get into full profile mode here. So what this pose gives you that almost every other pose doesn't is it gives you a variety of attitude in your session. There aren't a lot of poses, boudoir poses, where the attitude or the tone is sort of regal or majestic, or there's an air of authority to them. And although all poses in boudoir are somewhat sexy or sensual, if you can combine sexy with another mood, or like I say, attitude, you can get these interesting subtexts going on in your image. So you can combine sexy and shy, or sexy and bold, or in this case, sexy and regal. So this pose gives you a variation in attitude and mood and tone that is pretty unique unto itself. I think this is probably the only pose that I know of, that I use at least, that has this air of authority or superiority, or it's a regal pose, a majestic pose that I can think of. And so for that, it brings something unique to the table that a lot of other poses don't have. I like to shoot this on the floor as opposed to a bed. I mean, you could shoot this on a bed, but I don't want my subject sort of sinking into the bedding. I like that hardwood floor or even a cement floor to really support the pose up, lifting it up. The only key to this pose, like I said, is the face and profile. And then I would experiment shooting it both stiff-armed here with her upper body raised up a bit, and then also dropped down to her elbow here. And drop down like this with her head pointed up. You get her hair draping down behind her, which is a nice effect. And you get that somewhat here. It's more on her shoulders. But it kind of is the same effect both ways. So wrapping this all up, this is a good pose to start with. I start usually my sessions with a 4 series, and this is a very easy pose to get into. It's not difficult at all. The client's not looking in the camera, so that can be a little intimidating at first. This is a nice pose to sort of ease your client into the session and just get used to being in front of the camera. You could even do a variation where she looks in the camera, then looks away, just to sort of get her used to maybe looking into the lens. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of these videos. And if you subscribe, you'll get that alert every time I post a new video, and I will see you at a future point in the YouTube universe.